Hello and welcome to episode 63 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, joined by my co-host and MMO executive editor, Mike Mayer. And Mike, the Mets hired a manager today. They hired a manager, but it is not with the initials CC. Craig Counsell is not the manager. I don't know if anybody had that on their bingo card. It kind of what unfolded. We'll get into it. But obviously, Counsell's going to manage the Chicago Cubs of all teams. Strange to get all this news on a Monday after the NFL and stuff, but it felt like the MLB was taking over with all this news. It's pretty crazy. Obviously, the Mets are hiring Carlos Mendoza. Was really the number 2 under Aaron Boone the last few years in the Bronx. So, he'll be moving boroughs, going from the Bronx to Queens. But obviously, I got to get your reaction to, just everything that went down with Counsell and the Mets pivoting like they did to someone that I think a lot of folks probably didn't really know of or knew too much about until today.
Yeah, I mean, it was just kind of a wild day in general. It came out that Cleveland was hiring Stephen Vogt. Mm-hmm. And so folks are like, well, there's one less place that Counsell could go because he had interviewed there. And then reports coming out that Counsell was definitely going to choose today. Didn't know who or what yet. And then all of Twitter's just kind of waiting, and it dropped. Sure enough, New York Post reported that the Mets were hiring Mendoza, which I think it was less of a shock just because we knew that it was down to Mendoza or Counsell. So it wasn't a huge shot in the dark. I mean, I do think most Mets fans expected / wanted Craig Counsell to be hired. And I think the Mets certainly tried to. They certainly wanted Counsell. I mean, from the people I talked to, they made a very good offer for Counsell, a very strong offer. It didn't match the Cubs, what they did with their record-breaking offer, but the Mets certainly wanted Counsell. He was one of the only people that was a finalist for the job. And then I think the biggest surprise is not that the Mets didn't hire Counsell, is that it came out next that Counsell wasn't going to the Mets or Milwaukee. Yep. And everyone's just, at that point, it was just craziness of people guessing, well, where the heck is he going? Because it was reported that he was going someplace that currently had a manager.
Right.
Which just put another level of chaoticness on this. So he ended up going to the Cubs, pushing David Ross aside. And I mean, it's tough to blame Counsell. Outside of Milwaukee, that's the team right there. The Cubs are only about 90 miles from where he lives, and they gave him 5 years, $40 million. So he set the record for highest paid manager. And so he gets the highest salary and he gets to be close to home. So You have to imagine, even if the Mets if they did give the Mets a chance to match that offer, that he was still going to go to the Cubs where it's so close to home. And so that means the Mets would have had to have been over 5 years, $40 million, which, I mean, Steve Cohen's got a lot of money, but there's
tough
also
for a manager.
Yeah, that's a lot for you to kind of start your offseason by a very important offseason where you're going to have to spend a lot of money to, say, spend 5 years, $45 million, which is probably at least what it would have taken to get Counsell to come to New York. So, I mean, I think it's pretty fair to question not wanting to pay that much. And I think it's also fair for Mets fans to be kind of disappointed, right? Counsell's widely regarded as one of the better managers in baseball. This has long been rumored since Stearns took the job, since Counsell became a free agent, since he interviewed. Most Mets fans thought this was going to happen, and they were pretty excited about it. And like you kind of alluded to, and you'll see in a lot of podcasts, conversations, articles about Carlos Mendoza, he's a relative unknown in the baseball world, particularly to the average fan that doesn't, especially if you don't watch the Yankees. He's mostly outside of his minor league playing days. That's where he's been, is the Yankees organization, managing in the minor leagues, field coordinator, been the bench coach for Aaron Boone. as far as managing, he does have some experience in the Arizona Fall League. He did two stints there, which is, I think that's pretty important to note, because that's where teams send their top prospects for the most part. He has managed in Winter League too, and he's managed, I think, I can't remember the exact total, but it was close to 30, because of Aaron Boone is a pretty fiery guy that gets thrown out of games, and he's been suspended a couple of times too. So I think it was close to 30 games that Mendoza has managed in the big leagues as well. But yeah, it's a relative unknown, and it's certainly, I think it's fair for Mets fans to feel like it's a little bit of a letdown for a guy they just don't know much about, and Counsell, they certainly did.
Yeah, and I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head there, just as far as the feeling, right? It's been hearing Craig Counsell now for, it feels like since the second half of the season, you know what I mean? And especially then getting Stearns, obviously the link they had in Milwaukee, it kind of felt like that was going to be the case as far as, as even with money that you talk about, Cohen would have been willing to spend. I'm sure he matched whatever that was with the Cubs, like you're saying. He would have certainly done that, I would imagine. But, it's very interesting now, because again, I'm sure people looked at, it popped up today, and it felt like, a little bit out of left field, because it was a name, just like you said, unless you haven't really kind of dug deep as far as who the finalists were going to be, because all you've really heard about was Counsell, you wouldn't know. But I sure, for me personally, I at first reaction was, I don't love a hire out of the Aaron Boone coaching tree. I don't really like Aaron Boone as a manager. So I didn't love that at first. But thinking about it a little bit more now, it's a few hours to settle in, and obviously you're going to have all winter now, until the season starts to kind of noodle on this. But I would assume he obviously blew the Mets away in his interview, whatever it was, the Mets really, really liked. And from what I was reading a little bit, I don't know how true it is or not, that the Brewers wanted to bring him in for an interview. It didn't happen, but like, if they brought him in, it felt like he would have probably been hired there as well. So, it seems
the Padres as well. He was
okay.
The Padres had interest there as well, and I think the Astros probably would have too, because they were hoping to get a chance to talk to Counsell. So yeah, like you're saying, this is a guy that may be a relative unknown to the common fan, but he was kind of one of the hot items, I think, outside of Stephen Vogt, who got hired by Cleveland. As far as inexperienced managers goes, he was one of the hot items in and I guess you manager free agency. And so this is a guy, like you said, the Mets, it felt like they were, I mean, by all the reports, they were certainly very pleased with how he interviewed. And they wanted, I do like the fact that they made this decision when they did. And once they found out that Counsell wasn't going to take the job, they went ahead and got a guy that they liked. And I think it's important for Cohen to give David Stearns the reins, right? And I think it's important for them to trust his decision making, and hope that he makes the right call here. This is obviously a big decision for him, but we'll have to see how it works out. But I think we also have to take, like, with a grain of salt too. This isn't going to be, once that off season's over, this might not even be in like the top 7 or 8 of the decisions that Stearns make this offseason. I mean, what they do with Alonso, what they do with, if they sign Yamamoto, if they sign Schnell, Nola, different Josh Hader. I mean, you could keep going. All of these players, I think these players that they do or don't sign is going to have a far bigger impact on wins and losses than what they ultimately did at manager.
Sure. And I think another thing too, to your point, as far as how quickly they pivoted, which I think is another testament to strong leadership at this point, right? Something they probably haven't had the last couple of years. And I look back to the offseason of 2021, right? Going into the 22 season, the Mets missed out on a lot of candidates. And I think, obviously it worked out for them that season. Obviously they signed, Alderson wound up signing a bunch of guys for the lockout and everything else, but I'm sure they didn't want to get caught with an organization kind of without a rudder, so to speak, right? So I think that, what you're saying is spot on as far as like pivoting as quickly as they did. And listen, we understand what today's manager is, right? I think outside of a Showalter, a Dusty Baker, a Bruce Bochy, we know that the manager at this point is an extension of the front office. And I don't say that negatively or positively or anything like that, but that's just kind of a reality, I think, where the sport is. And with Stearns, I'm sure bringing in someone now that he can kind of mold, right? And not in a bad way, but just kind of show him the way as far as how they want things done, lineups created, kind of how they, their attack's going to be. It might not end up being the worst thing in the world now that he has someone fresh to work with. And, they'll obviously be collaborating, lineup wise and things of that nature. But, if you look up, Mendoza's kind of credentials, like you're talking about, obviously he's like a coaching wise, like a lifelong Yankee, but has done it at a lot of different levels. And, I'm looking up online now as far as his press conference he's done when he filled in for Boone, when Boone was suspended or whatever. But, he seems like a guy that's nose to the ground, like no nonsense, doesn't seem to, seems like a grinder, so to speak. And we don't know. We'll find out come spring, right? Once the game starts, we don't know. But I'd like to give Stearns and company the benefit of the doubt that they did the best possible thing they could as far as pivoting from their number one choice to someone that clearly they thought highly of either way and were, highly enough to bring them in as their second choice right away.
Yeah, and I think another point that you made, and I think is a very good point, is you use the word mold, but not in a derogatory way. And right. I think I've seen that out there, some already specifically from fans saying, well, this is just a hire for a guy that he can mold, and they mean it as a bad thing. Like you said, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing at all, that Stearns is going to feel comfortable working with the manager. And look, this is an organization that brought in Stearns, who is very young, Mendoza, who's fairly young, that want to win for a long period of time. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that these guys are going to hopefully work together for a long time. And Stearns is going to be able to, like you said, mold the manager into the position and how they want to handle games and everything. So I think this is a lot of wait and see. And I just don't think you can be overly negative about it outside of maybe just simply being disappointed that you didn't get someone's of the caliber of Craig Counsell. That's the only thing I would say. But like you said, I think you put that a good way. And I think, look, you also said that he does have experience in the minor leagues. Mm-hmm. And I see, a lot of pundits saying, well, he's a first-time manager and look what they did with Callaway and other recent managers and stuff like that. But also, situations. If we want to point to all the first-time managers, arguably, who's the best manager, one of the best managers in Mets franchise history? Davey Johnson. Sure. That's what a lot of people would go to. And he was a first-time manager. Right. And he won a World Series in his fourth year. Yeah, it was at fourth year. But he was a first-time manager. He had only managed in the minor leagues, similar to Mendoza. So I just think it's right to mention that while we also mention the recent failures too.
And to your point to that also, one thing I wanted to mention, Jack Ramsey, one of MMO's own, I saw he posted on Twitter, actually just as far as Mendoza's play development background. And for a team with a lot of young guys now, right, I think that's not the worst thing either. That's something good to point out. And, and as far as like the molding point, Stearns is going to want to build a culture, right? He's here. It's just presumably for the long haul. Obviously, have veterans in place that are, hopefully can help with that. But in general, you're kind of building a culture now from the ground up of how you want it to be. So with that being said, having a first-time manager, someone that has the pedigree and that could be, taken to a next level as far as a manager, I don't think that's the worst move in the world. It's going to be a much different team, like we know, probably a much younger team we know. So, it couldn't be the worst thing in the world. I understand being disappointed, but on the same term, I could say, Craig Counsell, who was great in Milwaukee, right? We understand that, never won a playoff series. So, you can go both ways with it. Now there's going to be more pressure on him with his salary now. And really, replacing a guy who I thought they screwed in the Cubs screwed by getting rid of all their core guys when they brought him in for a massive rebuild. And they played well last year for him. It looked like it was the start of another, successful stint for the Cubs, but obviously this happens. It's interesting, but I think in the long run, like you said, it's going to be a wait and see, but I don't think it should be as sky is falling, maybe as some people initially feel. I think it, in the end could end up being a very good hire. And I saw online too as well, and I forget who exactly said it, and I can't credit them, and I apologize, but I believe 10 of the 12 first-year managers this year, if that was the correct stat, made the playoffs. So it can happen. It doesn't necessarily mean because you didn't get the golden goose that this isn't just as good. But like you said, the offseason is going to play a lot into it, and then once games actually start, that's when we're really going to know.
Well, and I wanted to kind of talk about your point too with player development. When we were kind of mentioning before we even knew who were candidates, I mentioned Clayton McCullough from the Dodgers, who has a similar kind of he worked in the minor league, he worked in the development and in the minor leagues, and now worked as a coach for the Dodgers. And I mentioned him as a good reason, all that stuff as a good reason for him to be a potential manager candidate. And so, yeah, I do think that is a good point with all the young players that the Mets used last year and are certainly going to use this year. And with the talent that they're going to have in Double and Triple A this year, look, this is an organization that's certainly going to spend with Cohen, but if they're going to be successful in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, it's going to be in part because of the young players that are coming up through their system.
No, absolutely. And we've talked about it. Cohen talked about when he first bought the team 3 years ago, being the Dodgers of the East Coast and all that. And we understand that sustained success comes from, developing your own players, your own talent, and having a surplus of it. So like you said, hopefully this is the start of this with Stearns and Mendoza in the fold now as well, makes it better. But I am curious what just your thoughts. Do you think a hire like this now, well, as far as the coaching staff goes, do you think that they'd be more apt to keep guys like Jeremy Hefner and Eric Chavez because they kind of have some more, or more veteran bench coaches now, success, not whatever you want to say, but they have experience here. I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on how you think the rest of the coaching staff would kind of shape up.
I'm guessing just from what we've seen from kind of Stearns this offseason, I'm guessing they mostly take a fresh approach to it. Joey Cora and Wayne Kirby are free agents. Their contract ran out, so they're free agents. It definitely didn't sound like Joey Cora was going to be back. Sounded like he was potentially hired already, and it hasn't been reported yet. Haven't heard much about Kirby, but I have a feeling Eric Chavez interviewed for the Padres job. Didn't sound like he was a finalist, but he interviewed there. But I have a feeling he's the type of guy that's probably going to move on. I mean, Epler brought him over here. He was kind of handpicked by Epler. Jeremy Barnes, I don't think there's any reason for Stearns to feel tied to him. Danny Barnes, who they had as a coach on the staff too, I don't think there's any reason to be tied there. I think, like you said, maybe Jeremy Hefner is the only one that maybe sticks around, but I don't think his resume is overwhelming to the point that it's like you feel like it's a must. So I think what you do is, especially for a first-time manager, is let him work with Stearns and bring in guys that he is comfortable with. And maybe that's someone that he knows or Stearns knows and they talk to and get comfortable with. Someone as a bench coach that has some managerial experience, right? That happens sometimes too. I mean, you got guys like Ron Washington as a coach on a staff. I mean, you got Walt Weiss guys, coaches on staff. So it's not uncommon to see former managers there. And maybe that's how they kind of help Mendoza ease into managing too.
Sure. How Ron Washington hasn't become a manager again, I'll never understand. That's a whole nother topic for another day. I would love him to manage the Mets, but whatever. And also, you talk about experience. David Ross just got let go. Maybe he wants to come hang in New York, be on the bench. Who knows? I would imagine he would want to manage it. I don't know if he'd want to take a lesser role like that, but I'm sure, like you said, they're going to put their heads together. They're going to put the most comfortable staff that they can that'll help Mendoza kind of ease through here and navigate the ship. But
not to interrupt you, Sal, but I feel like whenever we record and there's a Jets game on, bad things tend to happen because the Chargers just had an 87-yard touchdown return. just for listeners, the last time we were recording live when the Jets were playing, it was when Aaron Rodgers got hurt. So maybe we should speed this up a little bit for our Jets
no more
fans.
Monday night football Jets tapings. You're right, because the week one, Mike told me how Aaron Rodgers' leg fell off 4 plays into the season. So great, we're off to a good start. I'm glad the Jets are right where I left them. That's funny, but I do want to transition off the manager. Just a couple of topics real quick to round everything out. Adam Ottavino declined his player option for next year. Obviously he wanted a little more. I think the Mets tried to restructure his deal and he wasn't going for it. So obviously he's a free agent now. Didn't have a great year last year. Obviously got worked, just kind of worked a lot. It wasn't a good year really for anybody. Obviously had a great 2022, but I just, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it was actually, I believe it was the other way around. Ottavino, before he declined his option, was kind of talking to Mets to see if, I'm sure he wanted to get 2 years out of it instead of 1 year, and it just didn't work out. I mean, he was, I think he was mostly solid last year. He just kind of, his ERA looks so bad because of the last stretch that he had to finish off the year. He got knocked around a little bit, and it was, when he's coming off another 60 plus appearances. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a huge deal for the Mets. They just don't, I mean, right now the bullpen is pretty empty outside of Edwin Diaz and Brooks Raley, who they did pick up his option, which was a no-brainer at $6.25 million. But outside of those two guys, I mean, when I was writing an article the other day, I was doing some research, and outside of Brooks Raley and Ottavino at the time, so just Brooks Raley now, they only have one pitcher on the active roster that pitched more than 40 innings out of the bullpen last year, and that was Drew Smith.
Wow.
So that just gives you an idea of, obviously getting Diaz back is huge, but outside of Diaz and Raley, David Stearns is pretty much building a whole new bullpen. That's going to be one of the biggest things on his table, is building out that entire bullpen for the most part. And it's going to be interesting to see how they do that. But I mean, obviously with Ottavino not in the mold, that's $6.5 million they have to give to another pitcher, another couple pitchers. There was no buyout or anything there. So I was a little surprised just from Ottavino's standpoint, given his age being 38, that he wouldn't just take $6.5 million and be happy. But I guess maybe he's trying to get that last multi-year deal, a 2-year deal, or at least a 1-year deal with an option. So I was more interested to see that he's the one that declined it and didn't take the money.
Yeah, no, like you said, that is interesting, but trying to maximize they can, like you said, just maybe 1 year, one more multi-year deal, something like that. But the bullpen's going to be, that's going to probably be the most, outside of see what they do with Alonso this offseason, how Stearns handles the bullpen is going to be interesting. But he's done it in past Milwaukee. We know that he's put bullpens together with a lot of felt like blood, sweat, and tears. You didn't know a lot of who they were, but they blossomed into really, really good pitchers. So hopefully you can do the same here. And then kind of the last thing, just to round everything out, obviously Kodai Senga was named a Rookie of the Year finalist for this year, but was left off the Cy Young finalist list. So I just kind of want to get your thoughts on that real quick.
Yeah, I felt like Rookie of the Year, that felt like a no-brainer. Also kind of a no-brainer that it's going to go to Corbin Carroll. Be interesting to see. Hopefully Senga can finish second, but I mean, I think we're pretty much all realize that Corbin Carroll is going to win that. Cy Young, I kind of thought he might be a finalist there. I mean, he's definitely arguably right there. I think after the top 3 guys, Blake Snell, Zach Gallen, and Logan Webb, the 3 finalists. I mean, then you have Senga and Spencer Strider right there. I think that's pretty easily the top 5 you'd be talking about. Yeah, I thought he had a chance maybe over Logan Webb. You knew Schnell was going to be there, and Zach Gallen, I kind of had a feeling was going to be there too. So I thought it was going to come down to Senga, Strider, and Webb for that last spot. So I don't think it was a like a not lock that he was going to be top three or
Sure.
anything, but certainly would have been nice to see. But either way, I mean, he's still going to finish 5th, 6th in the Cy Young voting, most likely 2nd in the Rookie of the Year voting.
Right.
I mean, that's just a massive first year for a guy coming over from Japan, and kind of the way he started the year, kind of struggling a little bit, right, with his command. So for him to even be in these conversations is certainly a huge thing for him, but also huge for the Mets when they're going into this offseason, knowing that they have him at the top of that rotation.
Yeah, absolutely. He had a tremendous second half. Really, we saw what the Mets saw and why they gave him the deal that they did last offseason, and hopefully he could just build on that and just, become even more consistent, reliable, and just be that frontline guy that they, are hoping he can be, and we think that he can be as well. But
well, and I think while we're talking about Japanese pitchers, we have to mention that Yoshinobu Yamamoto is, his team said they were going to officially post him. And to force a game 7 in the Japan series, he pitched 9 innings, gave up 1 run, set a record by striking out 14 and threw 138 pitches. That's some performance. I'm sure major league teams are not crazy about the fact that he threw 138 pitches, but he certainly won some scouts over with his overall performance in that outing. And look, this is, I know Blake Snell could win the NL Cy Young and still not be the guy who teams see as the top free agent pitcher this offseason. I think a lot of teams would rather have Yamamoto, and there's a really good chance that he's going to get over 200 million.
I'm one of those people. I would much rather take it, not even call it a chance, but rather make that investment on Yamamoto than someone like Snell. He's just too up and down a lot of times, and his makeup and stuff, I just don't know how well it would work here if he would even go for it. But it's gonna be a lot of big market teams vying for Yamamoto. We know that. Probably Dodgers, Giants, Yankees, the lots we know. But hopefully, having a buddy like Kodai Senga on the team can help it a little bit in Cohen's checkbook. And, it's going to be very interesting because, like you said, there's just so much pitching the Mets have to do this offseason between the bullpen and the starting rotation. So it's going to be very interesting. And then hopefully extend their elite slugging first baseman. But, it's just a few things. They got the manager. Though. So that's good. That's one off the list, and then about 20 more checks they got to do.
Yep, and I'm gonna not continue to tell you what just happened in the Jets game.
Thank you.
Let's get off the air before something else bad happens.
Appreciate that. I will find out in a few minutes, I'm sure, and be very happy. But that'll wrap everything up for this week. Very interesting episode. A lot going on in for a hot stove on a Monday. But we'll catch you next week with everything else going on in Metsland and free agency and so forth. But until then, everybody, as always, let's go Mets.